Hang on just a second now, Jim. I got to mute your mic. There we go. All right. So anyways, we have brought in the experts for a feral hog management session. Feral hogs are a big, major concern in Louisiana. So we're glad y'all are joining us today. We have two experts here today to talk about this. And we have Glen Gentry, feral swine specialist and resident director at Idlewild Research Station. Thanks for being here. And Jim LaCour. He is the state wildlife veterinarian at Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Thank y'all for being here. And Jim, before we start, can you give us a little bit about your background first, and then Glenn?
Hello, hello, hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, good. Thanks for having us.
Sure. Can you give us a little bit about your background before we start on our discussion?
Oh, I thought you meant sound background. I'm sorry. There we go. My background is this bird poster. No, that's not it. So I am a Louisiana native. I have been hunting and fishing since I was old enough to do so. I'm an LSU alumnus, and I went to veterinary school at LSU. Once I graduated from veterinary school, I worked in predominantly large animal private practice for about 15 years, and I taught ambulatory medicine and surgery, large animal ambulatory medicine and surgery at the LSU School of Veterinary Medicine for 2 years. Then in 2008, I was offered a job at the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries as the state wildlife veterinarian, and I've been there ever since. I have served as the chair of the Wild Hog Working Group of the Southeast Wildlife Association, and let's see, I was on the Louisiana Feral Hog Task Force, and I'm the outgoing chair of the National Wild Pig Task Force.
Man, so you do a little bit of everything.
Pretty much.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Both these guys, y'all, this is their first Facebook Live, so we're happy to have them on. And
it's my first Facebook period.
All right, both their first Facebook periods, and so it's been good. But Glenn, can you give us a little background on you before we get started?
Yeah, I graduated in 1991 from LSU in animal science. Came to work at Idlewild Research Station, worked 17 years. During that time, I worked on a master's and a PhD. I received my PhD in 2006 in reproductive physiology. So feral hogs wasn't something that I had started out with. It came along a little later. I might work mainly with artificial insemination, beef cattle and horses, some whitetail deer work. And more recently, I've accepted the position as resident director at the Idlewild Research Station and the Central Research Station. And probably 10 years ago, my predecessor, Dr. Darrell Sanders, who was at Idlewild, changed the mission of this station from a beef cattle and forestry station to wildlife. So that's kind of how we got into the feral hog problem.
Okay. Well, thank you again for being here. And guys, please, y'all ask your questions. And as we go along, we'll take as many questions as we can possibly get to. And Jim's going to start us out. Jim, would you mind starting out with a question? We already have a question from Shane. He's asking, why don't you allow feral hog hunting during the summer months on WMAs? That's his first question.
Very good. This is a subject that gets kicked around the department pretty regularly. And at this point, administration has chose to administer the seasons as they are. We have several things going on. First of all, just backtracking a little bit, the regulations on WMAs are that on most wildlife management areas, WMAs, there is feral hog hunting during any concurrent season. So with the weapon that is appropriate for that season. For example, squirrel season, you can hunt with a a rimfire rifle or shotgun with appropriate shot. During archery season, you can obviously use a bow. During rifle season for deer, you can use a rifle or shotgun with buckshot or slug. That structure allows an approximate 7-month season for hunting feral hogs on the wildlife management areas. During the remainder of the year, the technicians and biologists conduct trapping on the wildlife management areas for feral hog control. They also do maintenance on the roads. They do bush hogging. They do put in food plots and all that business. So there is work going on the WMAs. We also, during that time, have non-consumptive users, which are the hikers and photographers and kayakers and fishermen. The fishermen are actually consumptive. And we have, additionally, we have time in there for animals to relax in their environment and be wild without too much disturbance from humans. And so one animal in particular that is of concern on some of our wildlife management areas, not all management areas, is the Louisiana black bear. They are coming out of their dens after hunting season. They have babies with them, and bears, if disrupted, will potentially abandon their babies and run off. So those are some of the things that are in play with this. This is a fluid situation. It may change in the future, but it is visited very regularly around the department.
He was also asking, the second question was, what's the plan to continue the permitting for feral hog eradication from September to March? So.
Okay, well, you want me to do that now? I can do that. So at this point, for nighttime take of feral hogs, you need, just for everyone's edification, you need no permit from the last night of February to the last night of August. So you simply call the parish sheriff and wildlife and fisheries within 24 hours of going out to shoot hogs at night on private property where you have permission to be. During the remainder of the year, which for all practical purposes is hunting season,
right.
Currently you have to get a permit. It takes written permission and some information from the landowner, giving someone or for themselves to go out at night and pursue feral hogs. The department itself is sort of equivocal about that. There are actually two bills in the House of Representatives right now, which are House Bill 59 and House Bill 159, both with different methods of ending that permitting process. So there may very well be a change in that shortly, depending what goes on in the legislature.
Great, thank you. I think that answers the question. Again, y'all ask as we go along. We have one before Jim starts. We actually have one over here for Glen from Darren. What is the latest update on sodium nitrite, and do we have any estimate of when it will be available for you?
Well, from my understanding, there's two groups, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, that's working with sodium nitrite. It's us here at LSU, and then the Texas Parks and Wildlife are working with some New Zealanders and Australians on their product. Ours hasn't gone to field testing yet. We'll talk a little bit later about what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we got to where we are. I think Texas Parks and Wildlife is probably a little bit further down the road than we are. I don't know exactly where they are in that process. I do know that they've looked at some field trials, I think in Georgia and Texas. But I don't know the answers to when they're going to be available. People have been asking me that question for 5 years now. And I do know that once data is turned in to the USDA EPA, they have 18 months to rule on it or something like that. So there's some political machines that have to churn through this first.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. I was trying to unmute. There we go, Jim. Wanted to ask you, how did hogs get to Louisiana, and what kind of impacts do they cause in Louisiana?
All right, thank you. Hogs are not native to North America at all, even. There were no hogs on the continent to start. DeSoto brought them with him for the first time in 1540 on his trek as a walking food source. Today we carry MREs. They didn't have MREs, so they brought pigs with them. And as they went along, they dropped off some, or some escaped and became feral, they live in the wild. Additionally, it was common practice later on in years to free range pigs. So if you own some pigs, you notched their ears with a specific code that was your brand basically, and you turned them out in the woods, and then you kept them coming up with a little feed from time to time. And when you wanted a pig or you wanted to take some to market, you gathered them up and you took them. Some of those escaped, obviously. Up until 2010, we still had 14 parishes in Louisiana that allowed free-ranging hogs. And in 2010, the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry passed regulation to ban the free-ranging of hogs across the landscape. So it's not legal anymore to turn domestic hogs out onto the landscape. So that's how pigs got here. We've had pigs in certain areas of Louisiana for hundreds of years, in the Catahoula Lake Basin and the Pearl River Basin. They've been there, they stayed there pretty much. Uncle Earl Long, he went up to Catahoula Lake to hunt pretty regularly. They stayed there, they didn't move. Hog hunting for sport became very popular in the later part of the 20th century. And during that time, people started moving these pigs around to have a source or a location to hunt that was closer to home. And so as they dropped off these pigs, they set up shop and they did what pigs do, and they make a lot more pigs, and they basically took over. At this time, we have in excess of 700,000 feral hogs in Louisiana. We have them in all 64 parishes. They're in every habitat type, from marsh to upland habitat to bottomland hardwood. They're pretty much across the state. Some areas do have denser populations than others, but we have them everywhere. We have them in the municipalities. We have them. We've had them reported in Baton Rouge, downtown New Orleans. So they're not real picky about where they live.
Yeah.
So biologically, just a little background on these animals to show you what they do and why they do it and how they do it. They're omnivores. They eat anything. If it's got a calorie in it, a pig will eat it. You can put them in a parking lot and fence them off, and they'll live on chewing gum and French fries and baby diapers, which they will eat, by the way. So they can make a living anywhere. They are the most reproductively efficient large mammal on the continent.
What's their cycle, their reproductive cycle?
Yeah, they can have 2 litters a year. Their gestation period, the time they carry their babies, is 114 days, which is pretty easy to remember because it's 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. So as soon as they wean those babies off, they cycle right back in and can be rebred. We've done some studies on them. Their average litter size in Louisiana is 6 piglets. And as they say, of those 6, 8 survive. So they have, the moms are pretty protective. It's unless she just goes off and leaves some, their babies don't get picked off by predators too often. And so there's a pretty high survivability of those babies. Once they exit the stripe stage, they're really not predated on by anything but man at that point. And so our hunters generally average killing about 200,000 pigs a year. We have a mail-out survey at the department that has been used since the 1970s, and we have data going back. And at this point, it goes up a little bit and down a little bit, but it's somewhere in the vicinity of 200,000 pigs a year killed by hunters. We have ancillary pigs taken by our agency, the federal agencies, by paid trappers, and even if they get up, say, another 100,000, which is pie in the sky, they're still not reaching a benchmark that is set. The statisticians have figured with the high reproductive capacity of these animals, you have to take 70% of the population to keep a static population. So, for instance, on a property, if you had 100 hogs, you'd have to remove 70 of those to have 100 hogs a year later. And so if you do the math, we're not approaching 70% with our harvest rate on the hogs in Louisiana. So the population is still growing. As far as harvest of them, you know, I tell people it's like bailing a boat with a hole in it. You know, you have to do it or you're going to sink, but it really doesn't do any good. And that's kind of where we are with the technologies we have. The regulations now, as far as harvesting pigs or killing pigs, if you want to be blunt about it, on private land, it's pretty much wide open. You can, holding a basic hunting license, which is $15, you can shoot them year round during the day. You can shoot them. We've already talked about night shooting. You can trap them also with that basic hunting license.
Okay.
If you want to use snares, which is another method to catch pigs, you have to have a trapping license to do that. We allow aerial gunning out of helicopters, and that's used by the agencies, but there's also a mechanism through permitting that will allow individuals to do it. So that's there. And then we're coming into newer technologies such as the toxicants. And we can talk about those now if you'd like, or if you have other questions you want to answer, we can come back around to those.
I wanted to ask you, like, what are the impacts from hogs in Louisiana? You know, what's the economic damage?
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, you asked that earlier. I just started talking and got away from you.
No worries. I was like, you got a lot of different topics.
Yeah, so there are several different things to look at. Agricultural impact is number one. When you plant soybeans, you plant corn, the hogs go in there and they root up the seeds. It looks like you pulled a middle buster down the road. They just go down, they pick those seeds out. So the farmers often have to replant, and sometimes have to replant multiple times in order to get a crop up. They also will damage mature crops. Corn, beans, sugar cane, they hit sugar cane pretty hard. Some of the other crops as well. Dr. Sean Tanger, who was with the LSU AgCenter a few years ago, in the 2014-15 year, sent out a survey to row crop farmers, that's agriculture only, asking about damage to their farms, how much it was costing them, all that business. He looked at a lot of different factors, and at that point, several years ago, he figured that there was $75 million a year impact to agriculture in Louisiana. So that's a lot of money.
That's a lot. Okay.
On the flip side, on the environmental side, we've already talked about these guys eating everything. So they eat tons of earthworms, they eat seedlings, they eat acorns, you know, anything that they can catch that crawls, slithers, or runs, they'll catch it and eat it. They eat carrion, which may or may not affect things. But so talking about that and looking at that a little closer, they root, they take their nose and they dig with that. So in hilly terrain or along stream banks, that causes severe erosion in some places. They eat acorns, which is multifactorial. You can look at areas that have real heavy feral hog populations, and the regeneration of the hardwoods is really suppressed. A lot of those areas are just tallow trees because the hogs eat all the acorns, and there's very little to regenerate there. Additionally, looking at other wildlife, so your squirrels, your deer, and your turkeys use those acorns to make it through the winter.
Right.
Additionally, they, you know, when a deer is on an increasing plane of nutrition, going in the wintertime from eating all these nice fat acorns, their reproductive rate is higher, they have better success, they have more babies, and so that keeps your deer herd bigger and healthier. So if the hogs go through, you know, 1, 2, 20, 40 hogs go through and vacuum up the acorns off the ground, it's impacting those animals making it through the winter and impacting their reproduction as well. So you have all that. Water quality, LSU has done some research on that as well, looking at, you know, shedding of bacteria into waterways. If you look on our the DEQ sites at water quality, many of the streams and bayous that they test now are show high coliform bacteria counts, and much of that is from feral hogs. In a lot of areas, they used to attribute it to dairies. Well, a lot of the dairies, most of the dairies in Louisiana are gone now, and the coliform rate is still up in a lot of these bodies of water, and it's from feral hogs. So they carry the bacteria. As they say, they're a sport utility vehicle for disease.
What kind of diseases do they carry, like in particular?
Good, yeah, that's kind of in my wheelhouse there. So that's what we work a lot on. So they carry brucellosis. Brucellosis is a bacterial infection, a reproductive infection. It's spread venereally from pig to pig, but it's a disease that's zoonotic. It makes people really, really sick if you contract it. And so in our testing, we've showed that serologically in the blood, we've picked up about 5% of the pigs that we've tested, and we've tested many, many pigs in Louisiana. About 5% of them are positive for brucellosis. USDA has done some work at slaughterhouses, testing blood and culturing for it. And in that scenario, their pigs were also about 5% positive on the blood, but they were actually able to culture it out of the animals in about 13% of the animals. That's getting pretty high for a disease, and especially a zoonotic disease that can affect people.
Okay.
So if you are cleaning that animal, you're butchering it and you cut yourself, you get blood in your eyes or your mouth, or especially the reproductive fluids, if it's a pregnant sow or something, those can be teeming with bacteria and can infect a person. In people, that disease is called undulant fever. It causes a very, very high fever that comes and goes, joint swelling, joint pain. It's quite often misdiagnosed because doctors don't even think to look for it, because it's sort of, in the olden days, it was pretty common. People caught it from cattle and sheep and goats and other things, but all that's been pretty well eradicated in the United States, and now it's coming back through these pigs. So that's a very dangerous bacteria. Another disease is Pseudo Rabies. Pseudo Rabies is not contagious to people. It's contagious to just about any other animal, and that's a herpes virus. It's called Pseudo Rabies, false rabies, because it is not rabies, but it causes neurologic signs. It can cause neurologic signs.
Okay.
And it'll whack a dog. So people that have their dogs that get around feral hogs, either in the field or when they're cleaning them at their house, and the dog comes and licks the blood or gets around any of the saliva, they can get it and they'll be dead in 7 days, and there is no treatment for it.
Yeah. So,
and we're running between 12 and 18% positive for pseudo rabies in our hogs.
Okay.
We have leptospirosis. Lepto is a bacterial kidney infection. It's spread through the urine, and these pigs are urinating into the waterways, and so people are getting it like that. Lepto in people causes severe kidney infections. It can cause anemia. It can cause you to turn yellow and die, and it's becoming more and more common. Just as an example of leptospirosis, in Florida, where there are a number of feral hogs as well, they had one of these Ironman races. You probably can't tell, but I don't run a lot of Ironman races. But no, it's true.
Thought that was your hobby.
They had some pretty severe flooding due to heavy rains, and they went forth with it, and these people were getting scratched and going through ditches and whatnot. 80% of the participants came down with leptospirosis.
That's high. Okay.
That's high. So that's another one, and one that everyone's heard about, especially the older generation, is trichinosis. Trichinosis is a worm, a parasite, a nematode parasite that ensists in the muscle. And if you eat cooked or pork that is undercooked, feral pork, this larvae actually comes out and migrates through your body and causes some pretty severe problems. It causes muscle fatigue, muscle pain, and it can be fatal if it gets in the diaphragm or the heart. So when I was a kid growing up, every time Mama cooked pork, store-bought pork. She boiled it first and then barbecued it or baked it or whatever. And that's kind of the whole reason they did that, was for trichinosis, which is pretty common. These things have been pretty much eradicated in domestic pigs, which many of which are raised in enclosed buildings, concrete buildings now. So these diseases in domestic pork just about don't exist, but in these wild pigs, they are still rampant out there. So we recommend for people that are killing pigs and consuming pigs, just a few basic precautions, safety measures that you can do to prevent getting these diseases. First, if you're handling them, wear rubber gloves, preferably some sort of eyewear that keeps you from getting the blood on you, keeps it from splashing in your eyes. Don't eat, drink, or use tobacco products when you're cleaning it, because if you touch a can and you bring it to your lips, that blood's going to run into your mouth. Cook the meat to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. 165 degrees Fahrenheit will kill all of the things we talked about. And lastly, clean all of your utensils with hot soapy water with some bleach in it to kill these bacteria and other things on your instruments.
Those are great too.
Those are some of the big ones. There are other diseases we work on and look at. Things on the horizon now that we're looking for: classical swine fever, African swine fever. These are foreign animal diseases. They don't exist here. There's more and more cases coming around in the world in other countries. And if it gets into our country, there will be immediate embargoes on domestic pork, which can total billions and billions of dollars. Wow. So we're doing surveillance in the wild pigs for that right now.
Shane had a question on, are there any areas in Louisiana that are hotspots for the diseases?
Yes, these diseases don't magically move. They're not spread by vectors. They're spread by pig-to-pig contact. So it's very common when you have one pig to have multiples in that area. Likewise, if you have pigs that are naive in another area, they may never get these diseases. However, when pigs are moved, when people move pigs back and forth, they can spread the disease, and we have several examples where that happened. As far as a generalization, no, always assume that the pigs have it and just wear your protective gear and go forth with that way, because you can't really tell for most of these diseases whether the pig has it or not just by looking at them. So in talking about movement, I touched on that just a second ago. In Louisiana, it's illegal to move live feral hogs now. The Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry has passed some regulations. They will permit people that want to move live feral hogs. Those pigs can only go to 3 places. They can go to a permitted facility at their home or barn or whatever, and that permit is always also from Ag and Forestry. They can go to a quarantine feedlot, of which we have none in Louisiana, or they can go to a permitted slaughterhouse, feral swine slaughterhouse, of which we currently have none in Louisiana. So they can only go one place now legally, and the transport and the pen needs to be permitted by the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry if someone plans to move pigs alive.
Fair enough. Jerry had asked, are they dangerous to people? I know you talked about all the disease, but
physically dangerous?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I guess both ways.
Yeah, physically dangerous, yes, they can be. Probably 99% of the time, if you encounter them in the woods, they'll probably run the other way. Mature boars, especially if they're cornered, can be aggressive, and sows that have babies that consider you a threat to their babies can be very aggressive. And a pig is an animal that has no backup in it. If it says it's coming, it's coming. And they are fast, they're strong, they have a very low center of gravity, and they can do some pretty severe damage. Boars, especially, sows have tusks too. The tusks that you hear about are the canine tooth. They are a little bit modified for protection, for cutting, slashing. Boars, under the influence of testosterone, Their tusks grow continuously their whole life. They'll get very large. The uppers and lowers wear against each other, kind of like running your knife on a whetstone, and they become very, very sharp. And they can inflict some really, really deep and serious wounds. Boars also have a gristle plate on their side, which is very dense connective tissue that runs from just in front of the shoulder to just in front of the hip. And that's a natural mechanism that protects them from their tusks when they're fighting. So it keeps them from getting a serious cut. But some of the big pigs, that gristle plate can get thick enough to actually stop a small caliber bullet. So talking about the tusks too, we've had several cases in the South. One case to my knowledge this year in Louisiana, where mature boars with big tusks have actually eviscerated adult cows. They've actually cut them underneath and ended up killing the cows. So they can be very dangerous animals. Fortunately, the majority of the time, at least, if they're not being harassed and they're not cornered and they don't have babies that you're threatening, most of the time they run the other way.
Okay. We got some questions beforehand too, and we're getting one also on the side there about controlling feral hogs. Can you go into like methods of harvest and control for hogs, what we have going on right now?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
Oh, I said, can you go into methods of control and harvest on feral hogs? We've gotten a lot of questions on that. On
types of harvest, how do you kill them?
Methods of control and harvest.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So you have daytime hunting, which you can either sit a stand over bait, you can stalk them in the woods. You have trapping, which there are many, many traps available now. Everything from the small, little 4x8 traps with a spring-loaded door to large, expensive remote control traps that you can drop from the comfort of your home anytime, day or night, and they have a camera on them. Typically, the bigger the trap, the more pigs you'll catch, and these traps that have the remote controls on them do a better job of catching a large number of pigs without, quote unquote, training them. When a pig is a very smart animal. When they see their babies or their siblings or their podnas go into a trap and get caught, they remember that. And it's really hard to get those pigs back into a trap after they see that. So the smaller traps, the spring door traps, will remove a few hogs, but ideally you would use a much bigger trap where you can catch all of that whole group. A group of pigs is called a sounder, by the way. So that's the word of the day, a sounder. But if you can get that whole group to go into that pen and catch the whole group and eradicate those, that's really probably the key to numbers of hog removals.
Okay.
Night shooting is exciting. It can take some pigs off the place. It's hard to reduce the overall number with night shooting alone. Typically, we use all of these methods together to try to reduce the population of pigs. So trapping, day shooting, night shooting, all of those things go together, and you have to, kind of think about things and utilize them at the right time of year, the right place. If you have 500 acres of standing corn and you put a trap out with a little bucket of corn in it, they're probably not going to come, right? They got other food sources. But in the other times of the year when there's no grain out in the agriculture areas, or the acorn crop is gone or what have you, and they're kind of starting to get hungry, that's when you can really work on them with trapping.
Okay.
So yeah, trapping, day shooting, night shooting, and snares is another way. Snares are effective. You need to know what you're doing, or you're going to catch other animals that are not intended targets, and so you need to be really careful with that. And then
Toxicants. I'd like to bring it over to Glen and talk about what Glen's doing over at Idlewild on the research side of things. So Glen, could you tell us about what you're doing?
Yeah, we started probably 6 years ago with 3 goals in mind. We needed to come up with a poison that was toxic to pigs. We needed to put it in a bait pigs would readily consume. And we needed to be able to deliver that to where we reduced or eliminated exposure to non-targets. And that's what we've been working on for the past 5 years. We're using sodium nitrite. Sodium nitrite is found in all sorts of things. It's used as a preservative in human foods. It's used in humans as an antidote for cyanide poisoning. But pigs are highly sensitive to sodium nitrite. And so much so that when you feed them a bolus dose and you get above a threshold, and that threshold is about 188 milligrams per kilogram or 188 parts per million, that pig is going to die. And what's unique about that is the FDA says humans can consume finished food products that have less than 200 parts per million sodium nitrite. So what that means is we can consume things that have sodium nitrite in it at a higher dose than what it takes to kill a pig. And that's one of the reasons that sodium nitrite has been looked at so readily for this poison. We have been working on developing a bait using the sodium nitrite, but sodium nitrite is hygroscopic. And what that means is if you took some sodium nitrite and placed it on this table, especially with the humidity like it is today, it would sit there and it would draw moisture out of the air and it would turn into a liquid. And when it turns into a liquid in the right form, it will decompose into compounds that are not toxic to pigs. So that's one of the reasons that people wanted to use it on the landscape, because if it did get out on the landscape, the rainfall, humidity, and that sort of thing would render it ineffective at killing pigs. But that makes also a problem when you try to make a bait, put it on the shelf, and then deliver to the pig. For a long time, we thought we were going to have to encapsulate the sodium nitrite, which means we were going to put a coating on the outside of the crystals. And I guess I could show y'all some sodium nitrite here. I've got some in a conical tube. It looks about like salt. Tastes a lot like salt. So we thought we were going to have to encapsulate the sodium nitrite in a compound that protected it from the environment, that when consumed by the pig would be released in the digestive tract and then cause the pig's death. We worked on that a couple of years. Wasn't having real good luck. I had to find somebody smarter than me to figure out this problem. So I started working with Dr. Pohlman in the Department of Chemistry at LSU. And what we found was if we changed the pH of the bait matrix, and the matrix of the bait is what we actually put the poison in, and we made it slightly alkaline, so a pH of about an 8, 8.5, 9, the sodium nitrite can go into solution, but it remains sodium nitrite. It doesn't convert to inert compounds. So when the pig consumes the bait, it does the job and kills the pig. So that's where we are right now. We're making baits using sodium bicarbonate and other compounds to shift the pH higher to keep the sodium nitrite in its effective form. The other problem that we had was we needed to be able to deliver the sodium nitrite bait and not negatively impact non-targets. Sure. And I've told people across the state, Jim brought up the Louisiana black bear. If something is finally approved here, which eventually it will be, and we kill a Louisiana black bear, it's gone. I think the wildlife services are going to step in, they're going to pull the product, and it's not going to be there. So we have to come up with a way to deliver it to where it doesn't affect the black bear. There's been a couple of feeders come around. There was the Wise Eye at one point. There's the wild pig feeder out of Tampa. We've done some testing on those. We don't have black bears on the station. For the most part, they did what they were supposed to do. Jim may want to talk about that a little bit later. I don't know. But from what I understand right now, there has not been a feeder that survived the black bear test. Is that true, Jim?
Yes and no. So there are some that did much better than others, but they all failed for one reason or another. I mean, the bears are strong and reasonably smart, and
so I asked Jim because they won't let me work with black bears. They stay away. No, I can't work with black bears. So anyway, We're in the process of developing a delivery system within the university that we can control with a cell phone. So you put it up, pigs come, you release baits, pigs eat the baits, and we can talk about the preference trials if you want to.
Yeah, I think that's cool.
We developed our bait to where pigs will leave whole shell corn and consume our bait and then go back to whole shell corn. And so if pigs are there, you release the baits. If coons are there, or bear, deer, we've had buzzards show up at the bait stations, you don't release the baits. So we're in the process of testing that. We've been in the Atchafalaya, I think last year, a dozen or so times. We've had 5 or 6 black Louisiana bear come, and they have yet to get into the system. So it won't be long. We're going to turn this over to Jim and let Jim do his testing on it. But I think long term, there's going to be a company or organization that's going to have to certify a bear proof type deal. And we think we've got that part figured out. As far as preferences goes, we wanted something that the pigs would readily consume. First time I gave a talk about feral pigs, a guy came up to me after and he said, you need to use acorns because pigs eat all the acorns in the woods. You heard about Jim talking about the acorns, and the deer have nothing to eat. We tested that. Pigs like whole shell corn more than they like acorns. We've tested marshmallows. We've tested maple syrup. I was getting calls from accounting at LSU wanting to know why I was purchasing 5 pounds of marshmallows and all this other stuff. So one day, I told my research associate to go catch me a fish in the lake. We have a 40-acre lake on the station. And he looked at me kind of funny. I said, no, we're going to pay you to go catch a fish. So he went and caught a fish. We offered it to the pigs. And they ate it about the same as they ate the corn. So there was really no difference. But that was the first time that we'd seen anything that they didn't prefer the whole shell corn to. So then we went and bought fish meal. And for those of y'all that have had a chance to work with fish meal, it's a lovely smelling compound. We feed it to cattle, and it's a bypass protein and all this other stuff. It's made out of pogie fish down in South Louisiana. Pigs didn't like fish meal. So I got to reading some work coming out of Texas. Dr. Higginbottom said pigs were after calories. So we took fish, at the time it was bass, dehydrated the fish, and then offered that to pigs, and they jumped on it. They will eat dehydrated fish over whole shell corn 7 days a week, twice on Sunday. It happened every time. I was really excited about this. I went to a board meeting. Jim was there. I presented the data as the first significant finding I found. And one of the board members said, well, isn't bass a sport fish? And I said, yeah, but I didn't sell the fish to the pigs. I just fed it to him. Jim said if I didn't change what I was doing, he was going to have enforcement come visit me. So we moved to pogie, okay? And we're using dehydrated pogie. It's a Louisiana product. Works well. Several people have asked, what about Asian carp? It's an invasive species in Louisiana. I tried to find Asian carp. It's not as easy as you would think. We tested big head carp. They will consume big head carp just like they will bass and pogie fish. Okay. So it appears that there's something in the fish, the calories, when we dehydrate it and remove the water, they really like it. So that's basically what our bait matrix is. It's got a lot of pogie fish in it. It smells wonderful. The pigs like it. And the idea being that when we release baits from a bait station, they will leave whatever they're consuming. Most of the time, it's going to be a corn mash or whole shell corn. We have tested our bait against mash, and they prefer our bait to the mash. They actually prefer whole shell corn to mash, but that's a whole different story. But they will consume our bait and then go back to eating what they came there for, the corn. And with the sodium nitrite, death occurs at about 2 to 3 hours. Most of it happens at about 2.5. It's a humane death. The pigs basically wobble a little bit. They lay down and go to sleep, and that's the end of it. Basically, in essence, they suffocate from the inside out. When they consume sodium nitrite, their blood can no longer carry hemoglobin. It changes form to methemoglobin. and they basically suffocate.
Well, you have a few questions over here, Glenn, about what happens. Is there a domino effect from the poison when the pig eats it?
We do not think there's going to be a domino effect. There's something called the pyramid effect with Timic. People have used Timic where they'll poison a species and that carcass lays there and scavengers come in and eat that carcass and they die. And then scavengers feed on scavengers. So you end up with a big circle of dead animals with the species of interest in the middle. But because sodium nitrite reacts and decomposes in the environment, when it gets on the ground, it's not going to cause that domino or pyramid effect. We don't think that's going to happen. In fact, I think, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, in Australia, they're putting this stuff out with airplanes over there. They've done a lot of work to control some of their species, and it's a different continent, different animal. But no, and species are very different in their reaction to sodium nitrite. Rabbits are real high. It takes 300-400 milligrams per kilogram to kill them, whereas turkeys, deer, that sort of thing, are about where pigs are. They may be a little less sensitive. We've taken our baits. We have captive whitetails on the station. We've taken our baits without the sodium nitrite, of course, put in the feeders where the deer eat, and the deer eat around those baits to consume what they're eating. We did find out that crows really love the bait, so there's going to be some work to do there. But we think that if we can control the delivery, and we know what's there when you deliver it, that it shouldn't be an issue for non-targets.
Fair enough. So if this bait did come out, if this toxicant came out, is it a way to fully manage the population, or is this just part of management efforts?
This is going to be just another tool in the toolbox. Jim talked a little bit earlier about killing 70% just for the numbers to remain static. A lot of people are concerned that when a toxicant does come on the line, and we do have an federally approved feral swine toxicant, but it hasn't been approved by any of the states yet. But when it does hit, it's going to be a way to control the population. We're going to use this along with some of the other methods. I don't think the toxicant's going to be a silver bullet. A lot of people ask what the silver bullet's going to be. What are we going to do with all the dead pigs laying everywhere? It's not going to be that way. It's not going to be that way.
Okay. I think you answered everyone's questions over here. Let's see. Jim, you got anything else you want to add?
No, I think that everybody that sees a pig needs to kill that pig if they can. I know we had a question earlier about what to do with the baby pigs. Unfortunately, they need to be euthanized as well. They, at 6 to 8 months, they're fertile. We have, we did a reproductive study I told you about earlier, looking at average fetuses and all. We found 47-pound pigs that were cycling. So, wow. It doesn't take long for these guys to breed and, just continue the cycle and destroy more stuff and contaminate our waterways and everything else. So they need to be physically removed. Talking more a little bit about the toxicants here, there's been a pretty good bit of research on the carcasses and what happens after that. The sodium nitrite in the meat for me. So if we poison a pig with sodium nitrite and it dies right there, and you cut a piece of meat out, the amount of sodium nitrite in that meat is less than that of bacon, so that you eat every morning. So that's good news.
Yeah.
They have taken pigs that have died with sodium nitrite and instantly taken out their stomachs and put them out there in pens with coyotes and vultures, and there was no toxicity to those animals. The stomach acid in those stomach contents actually changed the sodium nitrite to a more inert substance that didn't kill either one of those scavengers. So nothing is without a cost. There are going to be some costs down the road, but sodium nitrite at this time is probably the the most logical route to go. There is another toxicant that was approved federally. It was approved by EPA a few years ago. It is currently not approved for use by any state. The name of that poison is kaput. It is a warfarin-based product. It has been shown to be very effective against pigs. It is labeled for use in a specific feeder, and trials that have been going on show two things. We tried the feeder here, and it was absolutely no impedance to bears. They walked right up to it and lifted the lid up. And then in some trials they're doing in some of the southeastern states, the pigs are not accessing the feeder to get the bait. So it's kind of a catch-22 with that. And warfarin, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is an anticoagulant. It's exactly the same as Coumadin. If anyone's on Coumadin, that's warfarin. It keeps your blood from clotting, and these pigs hemorrhage to death. And so, it's not as a aesthetically pleasing death, I guess, as the sodium nitrite either. But it is an option, and it's still being looked at. But to date, it is not registered for use in any state.
That's what I was going to ask you next, because Darren asked earlier, is there any research going on besides sodium nitrite that is looking at other ways of controlling feral pigs?
Yeah, there's always research going on. We have the National Wildlife Research Center, which is over in Fort Collins, Colorado, and they're working on toxicants. They're working on their form of sodium nitrite, which is in a peanut butter base. They're working on other control methods. One method for people with small properties that keep getting impacted, and we get this call all the time. Someone has 5 acres, has a garden, has flowers, has landscaping, and the pigs keep getting in it. You can't control pigs on 5 acres because they come from all around. Even if you get the group that's there, they're going to keep coming. For small properties, fencing is probably the way to go.
Really?
And that would be a good net wire fence. Electric fence helps, but I've seen personally in the field dozens and dozens of times where pigs went through an electric fence. They might squeal and not like it, but they'll go right through it. So,
crazy.
So for smaller properties, exclusion. They're working on other ways. Really, and one thing we left out, we didn't talk about, was dogs. Dogs in the right scenario, hunting dogs, can be effective. They can catch pigs. Generally, they've done a lot of studies on it, and it looked at, they're very effective at cleaning up pigs after you've used other methods to reduce those populations down. So you start with your shooting and trapping and other things, and once you whittle those numbers down to just a few hogs, then the dogs come in handy. Then you can come in and clean up those numbers. But
okay.
There's, in most places, they're not geographically separated. Geographic can be a large water body. It can be a highway. Pigs do cross highways. As soon as I say this, we're going to have 50 people say, I saw a dead pig, but you'll see 20 or 30 dead deer on the side of the road for every dead hog you see on the side of the road. We've done telemetry studies. We put GPS collars on them, and these pigs just do not like to cross a blacktop road. They'll cross small roads, gravel roads, dirt roads, but when you get a higher volume highway, they don't like to cross, and they don't cross as often. We've seen them, on the telemetry, they'll walk a half a mile down the road and never cross.
We had a question earlier from a farmer who asked, is there anything to stop hogs from tearing up my field? Like, what would be the best recommendation for him?
Anything to stop them from tearing up the fields. Well, that's going to be, if it's feasible, and on large acreage, fencing is not feasible. We've had farmers using portable fences. They'll use a portable net fence, a low fence, plastic fence even, to help keep some of the hogs out, or at least funnel where they can come in and out, which makes them easier to shoot. We've had people, once again, the electric wire is not going to stop them, but it will reduce their entry into fields. Basically, you got to keep them harassed and shot at and go in at night and stay on at night. Farmers, this is not brand new to the landscape, but it's an emerging problem for farmers. It's getting worse. Many of these farmers will probably find that it is actually economically feasible for them now to hire someone full-time to do hog control on their farm. It's trapping and shooting and what have you, versus having to replant 2 or 3 times, losing mature crops in the field, just damage to equipment, hay cutting equipment. When you're trying to cut hay and your cutter bar keeps going down to the ground because of all the rooting, that's very problematic and very expensive. People break axles on their tractors, so all that.
What'd you say?
Let me add something here about the farmers and stuff. First of all, I like to say I want to thank the Soybean and Grain Board and the Rice Research Board for supporting the work that we do here at Idlewild. And they support it because those hogs are directly impacting those fellas' pocketbooks. And one of the interesting things that we found is a picture. We were using a drone at one point to locate hog traps. And we ran across a picture in a Voiles Parish where there was a cornfield that was absolutely torn up, and it was separated by a 6-inch ditch from another cornfield that had no damage, a soybean field that had no damage, and a milo field that had no damage. So we talked to this gentleman, and he told us what hybrids he planted, and one of them was his Refuge Corn. Now, the way it works is the farmers plant Refuge Corn, and that's corn that does not have BT, which is a keep corn earworms out, right, but it allows the insects to breed, so you don't have resistance build up in the population. So we started running studies, I think 2 years ago on this, and we found the same thing. We had a Roundup Ready plot. We planted it next to a Roundup Ready BT plot, and the pigs consumed the Roundup Ready plot first, right here in our pens. The following year, we assumed at that time, and it was incorrect, that pigs were averse to BT. And so the next year we planted straight traditional non-GMO corn, Roundup Ready corn, and then several different mechanisms to do the BT technology. The last corn standing, when the pigs could choose, was the non-GMO. So it appears that the pigs like something that's going on with the Roundup Ready Liberty Link corn compared to the other two. Now, that's not to say that they won't consume it.
Sure.
But if they have a preference and there's something else there, they will pick something else over that. So there may be something down the road if we continue this where we to help farmers looking at different ways to plant, not necessarily what to plant, but what to plant where that would protect some of the corn from those pigs.
That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, definitely. I think you mentioned this earlier. Kenneth was asking, how long does it take once the pigs eat the bait before they die, that you've done research on?
Well, with our sodium nitrite bait, it's about 2 to 3 hours. Most of them fall in that 2.5 hour range. We did some work with a product called Zinc Phosphide. Zinc phosphide is used for ground squirrels in California. We thought it would be easier to get through the EPA. So we tried it. The problem that we ran into was we had pigs that were dying more than 24 hours after they consumed the zinc phosphide. That was the first problem. The second problem was I talked to Jim about it, and he said that the phosgene, the way this works is they consume zinc phosphide. It enters the stomach in an acidic environment and produces phosgene gas. So if you puncture the stomach of an animal that has died or that is sick with phosgene gas, it's released in the room. He said veterinarians have had issues with this with dogs on farms that have gotten into zinc phosphide, and there's brain swelling and all this other stuff that goes along with it. So for the question of how long does it take, for the zinc phosphide, it was greater than 24 hours. Not all of them were like that, but there was a problem with there was a great chance that people or hunters cleaning pigs could be injured using it. So we quit testing the zinc phosphide.
Okay.
So, but for sodium nitrite, 2.5 hours.
That's pretty quick.
Pretty quick.
I
I think with kaput, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 4 to 5 days. Is that correct? With kaput?
Yeah, they with the warfarin bait, there's a high dose and a low chronic dose, so they can eat it for 4 or 5 days, the very low dose. They can get a lethal dose in one feeding, but they have to eat a whole bunch of it. So most of the time it's considered that for the warfarin, they'll have to eat it for several days in a row. And then they will have a hemorrhage somewhere in their body, in their brain or lungs or what have you, and die from that down the road.
Okay. So. We had another question from Shane for you, Jim. In regards to the night permit during hunting season, if you currently have a permit from last year, should the same steps be followed to renew for this year?
Yes. Yeah. And it's on our website under the QNBNT permit. It can be found on our website. But once again, if you were listening earlier, depending on the actions of the legislature, the need for that permit may go away here. They have 2 bills in the legislature at this point to do away with the nighttime permit and make it legal year-round on private property to shoot hogs at night with simply notification of the sheriff's office and Wildlife and Fisheries.
Y'all are awesome. Thank y'all for all the information. Do y'all have anything you want to add before we sign off?
No, it's an ongoing problem. People are tired of them. People are fed up with getting their place wrecked by them. And it's going to take a group effort. And this is not going to be a situation where landowners can, just sit back and think this thing's going to go away. It's going to take work on everyone's part. And say, for instance, when a toxicant comes out, if Glen traps and shoots and uses toxicant and cleans up all the pigs on his place, if his neighbors don't do the same thing, he's going to be right back in the situation. So, there's some work going on in central Louisiana, but USDA Wildlife Services putting together these big cooperatives of landowners, and they're doing aerial gunning on these places. They're doing trapping and night shooting and all of these things. And it's working out very, very well, getting a bunch of landowners together to get big properties. And that just increases that buffer zone out and out and out so that you can put a dent in them. And then you can, as they trickle back into your properties, you can work on them. But it's going to be a thing that for many, many years, you won't be able to let your guard down. That's just it. You're just going to have to stay constantly vigilant on it.
And I got 2 things I'd like to add. Number one, the sodium nitrite. I want people to understand that pigs are more sensitive to sodium nitrite than people, but people are not immune. If people consume enough sodium nitrite, it will also negatively impact them. The second thing I want to say is I kind of think of pigs as rats. We've been poisoning rats for 100 years now, and we still have rats. So this is, like Jim said, going to be an ongoing process. And just because a toxicant is developed and approved does not mean that pigs are going to automatically disappear.
That is well said. That makes a lot of sense. We have one more question for Jim from Kenneth. If they keep the permit in place, can they make it to where a person that has 20 properties can just get 1 permit and the land permission letter be good instead of getting 20 permits?
That's certainly possible. We can go through our folks and talk about it. I mean, these are all, this is all relatively new. Even the permitting process is a few years old. But, if there's no rule or law that can't be tweaked or turned to better suit the public if necessary, sure.
Fair enough. Well, thank y'all again for providing so much insight to everybody. This is a really important topic to talk about, so that's why I want to have y'all on. And I appreciate y'all. giving Facebook a go, and y'all did awesome.
Yeah, I might have to get Facebook one day now.
People could follow you now. Well, y'all stay safe out there and tune in to more of our Live at Fives. You know, we're always promoting them, and next Monday we'll have one on raising backyard chickens and rabbits with one of our agents. So thank y'all again for coming on, and everyone else out there, stay safe. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.